Hi, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Fabrice Hudart, and I'm the Global Director of Equality Initiatives at Out Leadership. And today, I have the great privilege to welcome Father James Martin. Father James Martin is a Jesuit, he's the editor-at-large of America Magazine, and even though he has been very active in his ministry, including on issues such as refugees in East Africa. Lately, Father Martins has been particularly known for his ministry towards LGBTQ plus people. And in fact, it is a great privilege to talk to him today because there is a documentary about this ministry that is coming out and that will be presented at the Tribeca Film Festival in May. And I have to say that, Father Martin has written a huge number of books, actually a pretty impressive number of books, but there's two of them that I thought I should mention. One of them is Building a Bridge. And that book is really specific to his ministry on LGBTQ plus people. And in fact, that's what led to the documentary I mentioned. And then there is another great book, which is much more light, called Between Heaven and Mirth, in which Father Martin shows that he also has a great sense of humor, and that there is a great sense of humor in the church. So Father Martin, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure, Fabrice. Nice to be with you.
So, as I mentioned to you before we started the call, Father Martin, a lot of our audience is business people, lesbian, gay men, trans people that have made a place for themselves in corporate America, in corporate Asia, in corporate Europe. And so, but you're not completely foreign to the business world, because as you reminded me, you had a business career, which at some point you decided you were done with.
That's right. I think I was saying to Fabrice that for the purposes of your audience, it might be more important to know that I studied finance at the Wharton School of Business. I graduated in 1982 with a degree in finance, degree in economics, actually, with a concentration in finance. And then I took a job with international finance and accounting with the financial management program at General Electric in New York. I worked there in New York for 3 years. And then I moved to GE Capital in Stamford, Connecticut, in the 1980s when GE Capital was, as you remember, a real powerhouse, and worked in human resources before I entered the Jesuits. So, yeah, so those are my business bona fides for the audience.
Yeah, I think people will feel very comfortable because indeed GE is a building block of corporate America. So,
or at least it used to be.
Right. It ran into a bit of trouble last year, if I remember well, or 2 years ago. But Father Martin, so usually, we talk about at Out Leadership, we talk about family, we talk about success in the workplace, but there is always a bit of a missing component, which is spirituality. And so to jump directly into that conversation, one of the things that struck me a lot in the book, in the book you built on building a bridge, which means a bridge between LGBTQ plus people and what you call the institutional church. One of the things that is the most striking is that even when LGBTQ plus people do not feel welcome in spiritual settings, right, or in organized religion, they still want to be part of it. So you talk to a lot of LGBTQ plus Catholics, but you also talk to people that are on a spiritual path. Why do you believe that even though people do not always feel welcome in religion, they still want to be part of it?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to realize that God wants a relationship with everybody, that God created everybody, that everybody is good. And even if they're not part of organized religion, they have a natural desire for God. I believe that everyone has a natural inclination or an attraction to God. It's one way that God has of calling us closer. And so, some of my work is with people who feel, in a sense, shut out from organized religion. And a lot of my work is making the church, the Catholic Church, more welcoming to LGBT people. But even if you're not part of an organized religious community, you still want a relationship with God. So I think that's common for all humanity. Now I know that not everybody on this call may feel that way, or may be a believer or practicing religious person, but I think that God wants a relationship with everybody. And so we have to distinguish between God and the church, or God and organized religion.
Yeah, so I love that, and I want to dig a little bit deeper in that yearning for spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
because as you know, and of course, my what I'm going to say is a bit tinted by my personal experience, but sometimes you end up throwing the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
You know what I mean? You don't really feel welcome in religion or in your religion of origin, and so you basically don't really want to hear the word God, or you don't really feel that spirituality has a place in your life. And so one of the things that I want to discuss with you today, Father Martin, is this idea of coming back to spirituality.
Mm.
And I would love to hear your thoughts about, how can one overcome that, that thinking of like, this is not for me.
Right. Well, I think you're right, Fabrice. People's experiences with organized religion and with churches influences not only their relationship with organized religion and churches, obviously, but with their relationship to God. And so oftentimes people think that if a church or a particular denomination rejects them, that God rejects them, which is false, right? Because, God is bigger than any organized religion. I think one of the things that helps people the most in these situations is to point out that there's already within them, as I was saying, a desire for a spiritual life, a desire for God. And sometimes people will come to me and say, well, I want to connect with God in prayer, or I'm interested in learning about the spiritual life. And I always ask them first, where do you think this desire is coming from? Right? The desire is coming from God. This is one way that God has of awakening in us, this call. But on a more basic level, we are all, I think, designed for God, and we have this kind of longing in us for something more, something greater, right? When I was at GE, I sort of felt, business, as you know, obviously better than anybody, it's a real vocation for people. But for me, I felt this desire for something more. As St. Augustine says, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. So even if your people are very happy with their vocations and their careers and their jobs and business, there is always this desire for, is that all there is? Is there something more? There's a kind of longing and a sort of emptiness. And that's the call that's a call for God. That's a call for something to fill that hole, as we call it, a God-shaped hole. Only God can fill that longing that we all have.
Well, and I love the fact that you mentioned this idea of emptiness. One of the things that is not incredibly well documented, but is starting to be more documented, is that indeed LGBTQ plus people do face a disproportionate burden of mental health issues, addiction issues, and do you think that there is a link between the difficulty in finding a place to express that spirituality and the fact that sometimes it looks like LGBTQ plus people do have more difficulties coping with being a human?
Oh, absolutely. And I think organized religion has a big role to play, both positively and negatively. I think the negative influence has been so many hateful things that come from sometimes official church leaders and official leaders of different denominations that make LGBT people feel like they're a mistake, or they're less than, or they're not made right. And so that does contribute to their sense of feeling lonely and isolated. And that's translated in so many different ways, as you know, Fabrice, through organized religion, but also through families that are religious. One of the statistics I find really interesting is that among LGBT youth, let's take youth in general. If a young person comes from a religious family and the young person is straight, if they're having difficulties, they're less likely to attempt suicide. Okay, so the correlation is, if you're a straight young person and you come from a religious family, you're less likely to attempt suicide. Now, why is that? Because you can say, well, you come from a family with kind of strong moral values and people love you and God loves you and all that. If you are an LGBT person, the situation is reversed. The more religious a family you come from, the more likely it is that you will attempt suicide if you feel rejected. So there's a negative influence for many LGBT people in terms of religion. And a lot of rejecting families are religiously motivated. So we really have to look at that carefully. And by the same token, organized religion can provide a real welcome for people, who have felt left out of society, right? So in society, they might feel left out, but they feel welcome in their parishes. So yeah, again, what I'm trying to do is to show at least the Catholic Church the importance of this outreach.
Yeah, and something that you discuss in the book. So you talked a little bit about the connection to a higher power, right?
Mm-hmm.
As being important. You talked also about the link between sometimes religion and the family, right? That
Mm-hmm.
religion, you have to be part of religion to be part of the family, and that kind of strengthens those links. But something you talk a lot about in the book too is community, and that has been, I think, in the COVID-19 crisis, that has been a huge weak point for the LGBTQ plus community, right? People tended to go back to the community, to go back to the family, to cope and remain connected in a difficult time. And so could you tell us a little more about the link between religion, spirituality, and community?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, we're naturally social beings, right? So we naturally desire community for a whole host of reasons: psychological, physical, mental, spiritual. But part of the spiritual life is also worshiping together. We naturally want to worship together. I always say there's a reason why Jesus called 12 apostles together and a group of disciples and not just one assistant. He didn't have like a vice president, in charge of evangelization, St. Peter. He had a group of people. Why? Because he knew that people need to be together. They worship together. They support one another. So the church helps us to connect with one another. And so when it's just you and God, there's a problem, because that's not, I mean, it's important to have a relationship with God, an individual relationship with God. But if it's just you and God, then, by definition, anything you think is, God's will. So one of the things that I like to say about community and religion is that this is a quote from Isaac Hecker, who was an American. He used to say that the church helps us to connect and to correct. So it helps us to connect with one another, but also to kind of, push back a little bit. For example, if we say something like, well, I was praying and it doesn't seem like God wants me to take care of the poor, so that's that. Most religious traditions will push you on that. So there's a little bit of correction that needs to happen. Otherwise, we can be pretty passive and a little lazy sometimes about our religious practices if it weren't for the community.
Yeah. So in the book, Father Martin, you point out that there is now a generation of LGBTQ plus people that have been able to keep their connection to their religion and to keep their connection to their community because of progress in specific parishes, or because of the fact also that there is wider acceptance in the family, wider acceptance in the community. But let's be honest, for the vast majority of LGBTQ plus people, particularly of older generation, there is kind of a difficult road back to spirituality and road back to church, right? So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about is, have you thought about the question of reconciliation and how people individually can take those steps to deal with resentment from the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in terms of reconciliation, and I say this in the second edition of Building a Bridge, that the onus is on the church to do the work of reconciliation, because it is the church who has marginalized, in terms of the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church has marginalized the LGBTQ community. By the same token, in terms of the Christian worldview, which is the worldview I know best, but you could extend this to other churches, other denominations, Judaism, Islam. It's important to recognize that, that you're a member of the church. And for the Christian, if you're baptized, you're a member of the church, right? That's a sacrament in our theology. And for the Catholic, you are just as much a member of the church as your local bishop, your pastor, or Pope Francis. You just are. And so one of the things I try to do with LGBT people is to remind them of their membership, right? Because a lot of people tell them, oh, you're not a good Catholic, or you're not a good Christian. Well, if you're baptized, you're a Catholic or you're a Christian. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is to say to yourself, well, maybe I'm called to be, in the words of Jesus, a leaven, right? A little bit of yeast. A little bit of yeast, says Jesus, can kind of leaven the whole loaf. And you may be called to be the leaven, or you may be called to be prophetic in your community. And the third thing is also to say that, if you think about people who might disagree with one or another church teaching, you're not alone, right? One of the best examples is straight married couples who use birth control, right? Now, the majority of straight married Catholic couples use birth control. I think that's still accurate. And no one is saying, when are they leaving the church? And very few of them say, oh, I don't feel welcome. They've made their peace with it, right? In their own consciences. So I think we need to, in a sense, invite LGBT people to think about these things, in new ways, and to remind themselves that they're as much a part of the church as anybody else is. But see, that's separate from spirituality. We're talking now about membership in the church.
Yeah.
Spirituality, it can exist, separate from that.
No, I agree with you, but I think sometimes the resentment against maybe the organized religion is kind of the bottleneck to going back to spirituality. You basically say, this is not for me.
I think you're right. And I think that the key is to distinguish between God and the church. And they're not the same thing. Sometimes I use the example of a doctor. Let's say you go to a doctor and you have a terrible experience, right? He's mean to you, or she's mean to you, or they misdiagnose you, or whatever. Some terrible experience happens, right? Okay, fine. No, you don't go back to that doctor, but you don't say, I don't believe in medicine anymore, right? Or I don't believe in science, or I will never go to a physical again. People I think are able to make those distinctions. Now, with the church, it is a lot different. It's a lot deeper, and it can be on a corporate and an institutional level. But I do think, as you were saying, we do throw the baby out with the bathwater. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist or that God doesn't like you, simply because you've had a bad experience with your church, right? And a terrible experience sometimes, because the church has always been filled with sinful people. I'm not excusing it, but I think to see it in context. And quickly, another example is that people, I'm not going to get political, but sometimes people don't agree with the political direction in their country, wherever they are. And you don't say, well, you're not an American anymore, you should leave the country. People are still American, even though they disagree with it. So I think it's to see things, again, that distinction between God and the church.
Yeah, I have to say that, as someone who is Catholic and was baptized, when I read in the book, that my baptism was kind of an irreversible membership card in the church, I was a bit surprised. I didn't really expect to read that. No, expect to read that in your book. So
and it's also theologically true. I mean, the baptism is once and for all. And in fact,
you didn't make it up.
No, I didn't. Right, I didn't make it up just for LGBT people. And but I think they're told so often, which is very sad. And I'm sure you know this from your own experience. They're told so often, you're not a good Catholic, you're not part of the church, you're a bad Catholic, that they forget that. And that's essential. Baptism supersedes all of that.
So one thing that was also interesting in the book is that and in that case, we're looking at the Catholic Church, but I think it might be true of other religions, is that sometimes there is a bit of a tendency to look at organization as being monolithic, in the sense that, but you do talk in the book about priests that are actually in their parish, that are very welcoming of LGBTQ plus families, and that have a relationship with the LGBTQ plus community. And you took, there's a great story I vaguely remember in which someone is looking for compassionate priest to give the last rites to a person. And what is kind of implied in the book is that that person did find a compassionate priest to give the last rites to the person that was dying. And so why do you think, and I think it's particularly true for the Catholic Church, that we tend to look at it as if everybody was the same?
Yeah,
And
that's a great question, because it is very centralized. I mean, we have a pope, and unlike other religions that are more they're less organized, right? And there's less of a focus on the leader. So in the Catholic Church, the vicar of Christ, I mean, Jesus's representative on earth is the Pope, and everything goes up to him. And so he's kind of this very visible symbol. And so whatever the Vatican says, people tend to think that's what the entire church believes, okay? Or that's how it's done in the entire church. So people have this idea of it, as you say, as monolithic. The problem is that doesn't adequately reflect the situation on the ground. So some people would say, well, the Catholic Church is homophobic. I live next door, literally outside my window. The church is right next door to a church called the Church of St. Paul the Apostle. And they have a flourishing, this is in Manhattan, LGBTQ outreach group.
is that in Hell's Kitchen? No.
But close to Hell's Kitchen. It's a little further north. It's Hell's Kitchen, Lincoln Center.
Oh yeah, that's where I used to live. I used to pass that church all the time.
Yeah, and so they have a huge LGBTQ outreach group. And if you set foot in that church, the 5 o'clock masses where a lot of the LGBTQ community goes, you will feel completely welcome. Completely. There's no question you feel welcome in terms of who's around and the kind of programs they have. So, we have to remember that there's that. And then we also have churches, for example, in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in sub-Saharan Africa, which are not welcoming to LGBTQ people and in fact are condemnatory. So the church is not monolithic, and the church is still progressing along this journey, including the Vatican, on how to welcome LGBTQ people. But there are places, many places, and an increasing number of places, and cardinals and archbishops and bishops who are very welcoming.
So, at Out Leadership, we love to talk about concrete steps. So, sometimes when we are thinking about the topic of inclusion in the workplace, we kind of ask, what companies can concretely do. So you do have a little bit of a recipe in your book, in which you develop a framework that shows, your Wharton degree in full use, which is compassion, respect, and sensitivity on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the meat of the book. So I'm not sure you can summarize it in 3 minutes, but can you tell us a little bit what that framework means?
Yeah, sure. So the 3 words are respect, compassion, and sensitivity, which come from the Catechism. And the idea is that both sides would treat the other side with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. But I want to make clear that it is the church's responsibility to start this discussion, to reach out, because it's the LGBT person who has been marginalized by the church, not the other way around, right? But more basically, what we have to look at is the way that Jesus treated people who felt like they were on the margins, with love, mercy, and compassion, right? So whenever he meets someone who feels like they're on the margins, right? A tax collector, a Samaritan woman, a Roman centurion, these are all people kind of outside the normal Jewish milieu, or outside the group that would have been accepted. He listens to them, he talks to them, he encounters them, he treats them with respect. Oftentimes he heals them from something, from some physical ailment. And so this is what the church has to do. This is how the church has to reach out to people who feel like they're on, as Pope Francis says, the peripheries.
I noticed your perfect accent in saying Jewish milieu.
Oh, merci bien.
Your mother did a very good job.
Yeah, ma mère well, I won't speak French. I'm not gonna. My mother was a French teacher, so she would be very upset. If I didn't know how to say milieu, she would have been very upset.
You did a very good job.
Thank you. High praise.
But to come back a little bit to the concrete steps. So if you were meeting a gay or a lesbian person or a trans person that told you, I have this craving for spirituality, but I don't know where to start.
And I get that a lot.
What would you recommend?
The first thing I would say is I think it's such an important point. where does that craving come from? And to invite the person or encourage the person to see that craving or that desire for completion or connection as coming from God. How else would God call you? And once they are able to see that, once they're invited to see that, once they accept that as a possibility, it makes the journey a lot less frightening, because they realize it's not simply their curiosity, on an intellectual level. It's a response to a call. And to say to the person, this is God calling you into a connection, into a relationship, into a life of prayer. And then it's very easy to move from there. Then the next step is to say, where are you already encountering God? So it's not for me to say, here's what God's going to do. It's an invitation to say, where is God already at work? And you might say, well, I feel God in my family or in my children or in my friends, or, when I do this or that. And I say, okay, well, let's start to talk about that. Let's talk about the way that God is active in your life. Let's talk about the way that God is encountering you. And then they start to come up with an image of God. So, for example, they can let go of the God as the angry judge, the person who tells them that they're terrible, right? That they might have gotten from some priest or some religious leader, right? Or an imam or a rabbi or their parents. And let's look at who God really is for you. Oftentimes it's the God who gives them calm, who gives them peace, who gives them a sense of love, of uplift. Then they can have a relationship with that God, with the real God. And once they have that kind of relationship, entering into organized religion becomes much easier, because they're comfortable with who they are. They know that God loves them, that God created them, and that God's on their side. So it just changes everything. So that's the foundation. The foundation is the relationship with God, the real God, not the false image of God that they have in their mind. And after that puts everything in perspective.
One of the things that I would love to come back to, Father Martin, is the role of spirituality in life, even though that's not a very linear way to conduct this interview. But I just remember that I read somewhere that the happiest Americans are the Amish people, and a lot of it is kind of connected to this idea that their faith is very strong, and so. And I recently wrote an article about the fact that in the United States there has been an increasing number of people that are on antidepressants. In fact, I think it's estimated that 45 million people are on antidepressants. 25% of them have been on it for more than 10 years. And so that kind of is a sign of also the difficulty of living, which is not specific to the United States, which I think is specific to the entire world, which is there is some suffering with being. And so my question to you is, what do you think as a link between taking those steps toward having a spiritual life and building faith and happiness?
So the link between and happiness. Well, I would say that, simply because you're religious or believe in God doesn't mean you're going to be happy necessarily, right? And so that's the prosperity gospel, which is, I think, baloney. I mean, the idea is if you believe in God, everything good will happen to you, or nothing bad will happen to you, or you'll be rich, which is, the worst conclusion of all. I mean, we look at a lot of the lives of the saints, and, for example, Mother Teresa, maybe the people who, when you think of the holy person, I think of Mother Teresa. She suffered a lot in her life. She suffered physically. She had sort of problems in her prayer life. It didn't mean that because she believed everything was fine with her. By the same token, I think having a relationship with God does put everything in perspective. It gives you a sense of meaning. It gives you a sense of purpose. And it's not, I don't want to think of it as transactional, like you should believe in God in order that you have, a sense of purpose. It just happens, right? It's like falling in love or having a partner or a husband or a wife. It's not, you don't do it in order that, you feel fulfilled. It's an outgrowth of this relationship. And so it puts the struggles and it puts the difficulties in perspective. And I do know that people who are more religious, have lower rates of depression and things like that. So it's not a cure-all, because you don't want to say if you join the church, you'll suddenly be happy. there's a lot of I mean, you could join the church and you could have some terrible illness or financial problems, but the church and the relationship with God, see, going back to that relationship with God, if you have an understanding of God active in your life, it's easy to see where God is at work, right? And that puts a lot of things in perspective, and it does make things a little easier.
Yeah, and I think also maybe an aspect of it is also believing that there is an order to things,
Mm-hmm.
and that, you know, you maybe having a greater acceptance. I mean, I'll give you an example. I happened to have a nanny for my children when I was living in New York, and she used to go to that church in St. Paul, which was right at the corner of me. And I remember this woman had stage 4 breast cancer at some point when she was taking care of my kids. And I was pretty amazed by how accepting she was of, you know, when I feel that I would have gotten revolted and maybe angry and maybe she was very accepting of cancer. And when you would talk to her, I mean, it was clear that, you know, she was Filipino, she had a very strong faith, and it was clear that her faith played a role. So isn't also one aspect of faith? I mean, I agree with you that it cannot be transactional. This is what I'm going to get if I get a spiritual life, but it probably also plays a role, no, which is accepting that things have a meaning and that they happen maybe for a reason.
Well, I think that that it helps in terms of just knowing that God is with you, right? And so, you know, look, you could be the most religious person in the world and have cancer and be angry. You can be angry at God, right? I mean, that's part of being in an honest relationship with God. You can be disappointed or sad, or that doesn't mean that I'm sure, I know you're not implying this, but it doesn't mean that your emotions kind of go out the window. But when you're in a relationship with God, when you feel that God is with you, it does make things more, in a sense, bearable, right? Because you're not alone. And you do become more accepting. Now, whether or not it's part of God's plan, you know, that's a little bit of that's a more mysterious question. And so we can't just say, oh, this is part of God's plan, so I don't have to worry about it. It's that you're in a relationship with a God. And even if, here's the point, even if you don't understand what's going on, you're still in a relationship with God. You can be in a relationship with a God that you don't understand. Right. So let's say something more severe. If, you know, God forbid, someone has a child who's sick, you know, you can't say to that person, oh, it's part of God's plan and just accept it. No, I mean, that's monstrous. But knowing that God is with you, knowing that you are in a relationship with God, you know, knowing for the Christian that Jesus went through suffering, it does give it a different perspective, and it does enable people to be more accepting, even if they can't understand it.
You know, so talking about God's plan, I had two transgender women on a programming recently for Transgender Awareness Day, and one of the questions that I asked them was, why do you believe you're part of the creation? Well, you know, why do you believe you are here? Even though I think for a lot of people there is a bit of a misunderstanding or confusion about why are there trans people. And so their response, you know, both of them had the same response, which is they said that they believe they have been placed here to be of service to others, you know, and that their experience and their, you know, partially their suffering, but also their happiness, because there are two very fulfilled women. One of them is the head of Trans New York, and the other one, Stephanie Battaglino, is actually training corporations on inclusion. And, you know, they felt that they made sense of their journey as, you know, well, there was suffering, but that helped me be of service to others. And so, you know, I'll tell you that sometimes as a gay man, I had a bit of difficulties understanding what was my place in the creation. You know, very often, you know, straight people have kind of a blueprint of the reason why they're here. They're here to have children, to perpetuate the race, and so why, you know, why do you think, and you don't have to answer because it's a really broad question, but why do you think LGBTQ plus people are part of the creation?
Oh, I've never been asked that question before. I not have to speak, you know, kind of on behalf of God. I would say the same reason that straight people are part of creation. I would say the same thing, or flowers, or birds, or it's part of the mystery that God has created. It's part of diversity, and they are there to be themselves. I think it's even more basic than they're there to do service, which I think that's a wonderful answer, and that's a way that one lives out one's life. Of course, we're all meant to love one another and to care for one another, but I think what they're really there for is to be themselves. Right? There's a wonderful line from Gerard Manley Hopkins. It's a great poem, and it's called, I think, When Kingfishers Catch Fire. He's an English poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and he basically says, "What I came for is me," and that doesn't mean I came just to, sort of serve myself, but my vocation is to be myself. And I think that I would say that the individual transgender person is a blessing to the world for who they are, right? Not simply as people who do service, which is really important, but for who they are, for their loves, for the people who love them, for their likes, for their dislikes, for the way they contribute in their unique way. Because we would never want to say all transgender people should be like this. So Fabrice, you have friends, you have family, you have people who rely on you. You are Fabrice. That's your deepest vocation. As Thomas Merton said, for me to be a saint means to be myself. And that goes for transgender people, straight people, everybody. And so each person is a sort of a unique, beloved creation of God. And I think that the LGBTQ person, oftentimes by organized religion, and I think this is a sin and a scandal, is made to feel that doesn't apply to them, but it does. They are just as beautiful and just as just a beautiful creation of God as anybody else is.
That's great. And I'll tell you, I have two children. I have two little boys, and I get a lot of credit from society to be a father. And sometimes it makes me reflect on the fact that society very often, celebrate parents as, because they find that there is purpose in children, and I do know that sometimes maybe there is a bit of a desire in LGBT people to have children so that they find purpose. Yeah. So in your opinion, one can have purpose in itself, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, I know so many single people or widowed people or people who have disabilities that some people would think, well, they don't have children, or they can't be so-called productive. But that's not what we're here for. My novice director used to say, I love this saying, is that we are human beings. We're not human doings. One of the problems with the West, and I'll say, as a Wharton grad, and the capitalist system, is that we all tend to think we have to produce, we have to make, we have to produce, we have to achieve, we have to accomplish. And, that is not what life is about. I mean, certainly it's about service and loving other people, but it's not about making or producing or proving. It's about being. And I think that's key. So I do want to move away from the idea that, if you don't do certain things, like if you don't raise children, you're somehow not productive. You're you. And if you're a single person and you have friends who love you and you love back, and you flourish and help other people flourish, your vocation is to be yourself. It's not to produce something. Because then what happens when you stop producing? What happens if you get sick, or what happens if you're poor? What happens if you become disabled and you can't work anymore? Does that mean you're no longer good for society? And this is the whole idea of the dignity of everyone's life, even the refugee who is not producing anything. The refugee in as many ways is kind of taking from society, right? But they're loving their families. And so we're not human doings.
Well, I have to say that I love this because, you're speaking to an audience of hyperachievers. Right?
I know. I mean, as I said, I was at Wharton. I was a hyperachiever. I was at Wharton. I was at GE. I was on the fast track, and we get into this rut that says that we are what we do and we are not what we do. Because the problem is then when we are not doing anything, we're nothing, and that's false. And we have to move away from that.
I want to dig a little bit deeper. I think we still have a bit of time.
Sure.
I want to dig a bit deeper in this because one of the things, I just wrote a piece about COVID-19 and the revolt of employees. And, lately, I don't know if you have seen, but a lot of people are revolting against incredibly long hours. And there was in particular in the banking sector, junior banker that said, no amount of money can make me relinquish my youth and my time and
or my life.
And so I would love to hear your thoughts about why do you think that maybe COVID-19 has been a bit of a wake-up call when it comes to this hyper productivity you mentioned.
I think for a couple of reasons. Yeah, I think for a couple of reasons. I think perhaps the most practical reason is that with Zoom and with digital capabilities, people can work constantly. And so, look, I mean, again, I'm speaking as a Wharton person and as a GE alumnus.
And a very prolific writer.
Well, thanks. Yeah.
You must work hard to produce that number of books.
Yeah. What is the main goal of a corporation? The main goal of a corporation is to make profits, to increase, the price of its shares in order to help shareholders, and to, that's it. So it's the bottom line. It's not to increase, people's personal satisfaction. And so, in terms of the COVID, the corporation is just going to want to have you work, right? That's the impetus. And it's up to the individual to say, no, that is not how I want to live my life, to draw some sort of boundaries. That's the first thing. So the fact that people were able to be on Zoom calls 24/7 meant that the corporation expected that, okay? Because of the bottom line and because of the even during sort of an economic downturn, there was more of a desire for that. So I think people are revolting against that. The second thing is that COVID has helped us to look at what is important in life. Okay, so when you are not able to see your family or your friends or communicate with people, you start to think, what do I really value? Pope Francis said something very beautiful at the beginning of the crisis. He said that this is not God's judgment on us, meaning it's not God punishing us for something, but it is an invitation for us to judge what is important. And I think people are realizing, I don't have to live like this anymore. This was, again, business is a real vocation for most people, right? For people all on this webinar, this podcast, this video. But eventually you have to say, there are other measures in life, besides the bottom line. That is not the meaning. The meaning of life is not your paycheck. Right. And so that it's forcing us to look at that. And it's forcing us to look at the ways that corporations try to convince us otherwise. And I know that up close.
Well, I kind of love that because we have gone a little bit full circle, which is that, the French philosopher Pascal loved to say that human beings would be much happier if they would sit for a minute and contemplate the fear of death. But indeed, I think what happened is that with the pandemic, a lot of distraction get taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the silence, maybe that's where for LGBT people, that yearning for spirituality get a bit louder. And so I feel that you pointing out how our obsession with productivity might actually be unproductive. In the sense that it gets us away from our purpose and from really fits into that discussion about the yearning for spirituality.
Well, yeah, I mean, in so many ways. So in a practical way, it can hurt us because we get burned out. Okay, because there's no end to the amount of work that we do. We get burned out, we get angry, and we get overly focused on things and money instead of people. That's the first thing. The second thing is it crowds out in our mind any, in a sense, any desire for God. We don't have time, as as Pascal would say, we don't have time to just be quiet and sit in our rooms. But I think what happens is eventually people say, and you saw a lot of this during the pandemic, people leaving New York and realizing, I don't have to live like this. People who had been commuting and kind of going into the rat race saying, I can do some of this from home. I can live a more calm life. I don't need to be in this incredibly expensive apartment. But eventually you realize that it doesn't make you happy per se. I mean, it's nicer to have more money than it is to have less money. It makes life a little easier, but it doesn't make you happy. Having a bigger bank account doesn't per se make you happy. We have so many examples of rich people who are miserable. And so it has helped us, I think, a little bit to reflect people. And as you say, Fabrice, people have had more time to do that. I was surprised. I came out with a book on prayer called Learning to Pray, and it was a New York Times bestseller a couple of weeks ago. And I think one reason is because people have more time to think about these things. But I always go back to my novitiate. We're not human doings.
Yeah, I have to say, I was reading your book, and at the end of the book, there is an entire section about meditation and prayer. Basically, you give a little question that are supposed to, and in my head, I was like, who has time for this? Who buys a book and then gets homework on top of it?
Yeah, and then you have to say, well, who has time for how much time do people spend in front of Netflix every day? And people say, oh, God's so important to me. And you say, well, how much time do you spend on God? How much time do you spend at the gym? How much time do you spend on Netflix? So who has time for that either?
No, that's a good point. And and I love the fact that in a way you talk also about a crisis, COVID-19, as also an opportunity for us to maybe reevaluate what we are doing, and also which amount of time we devote to an important part of our life.
Yeah, and I think it's in a sense what's happening. I think in our consciences, or however one understands, the way that the human being works, or that the God works in the human being, there's something that is out of whack, right? And it doesn't feel right to us. And I think that's one way that God acts on us, in a sense, by pointing out things that feel strange to us, that feel like that doesn't fit. For me, that led to leaving the corporate world and entering the Jesuits. Now, obviously, not everybody does that. And again, I have many friends. I'm meeting with them tonight. Actually, funny enough, my GE friends I'm meeting tonight, they're all in business. And so, but when business, in a sense, becomes antithetical to what you're doing, or when your job does, it's time to sort of look at it really seriously and to say, what do I need to accept? What do I take in? What part of the sort of mores of the business world aren't working for me? And one would be, and it's a lie, I am what I do. And that's a lie, right? Because does that mean that people are meaningless or useless if they're not able to produce? I mean, we have that problem with people retiring, right? They don't feel like they're useful. And
I was at the World Bank for 14 years, and
yeah.
And we had an amazing retirement package, amazing, right? But the problem is that everybody would die shortly after they would retire and never get the benefit of the package, because we killed ourselves on the job.
Yeah, and let me be clear, I'm a very active person. I mean, I like working, I like writing, I'm very busy. Okay, so, but my value or my meaning in God's eyes is not what I produce, or how many hours I work. And I think you kill yourself. I mean, you'd overwork yourself. You look at something simple like let's take something simple like a child. Okay, you look like an infant. Okay, it's beautiful creation, right? You say this child is not doing anything, he's useless. What's the point? And we sometimes say it about old people too, right? What's the point? Useless. And that's just, again, that is a very Western way of looking at humanity, or at the human condition. It's about producing or making things, and you're useless and you're valueless if you don't. And that gets into us a lot. And I think it's something that needs to be combated. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, as the Wharton grad, I think the business world has contributed to this immensely. Value. One of the things.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
One of the things I always think is this. This is way off the topic. What is the most taboo subject today in conversation? It's not health. People say, oh, I have this problem with my doctor. It's not even mental illness, right? Oh, I'm going to a therapist. It's not a marriage problem. So all these things that you might think might be embarrassing. It's not even depression. You know what it is? Salary. You can say to someone, have you ever seen a therapist? No, I haven't. If you say to somebody, how much money do you make? It's horrifying. It's seen as this huge insult. I mean, if I asked you literally, how much do you make? How much do you take in? Why is that? Well, it's because it's the way we judge ourselves and it's the way we judge other people. And so if we hear that someone is making $1 million instead of $500,000, he's above us or she's above us, and we feel lower than. It's so personal. It's so important that it's taboo. And that's always been shocking to me. That is one of the most offensive things you can ask someone. No, how much do you really make? Oh my gosh, that's so offensive. It's because that's our measure. And we have to get away from that. We have to get away. And,
I can tell you this is not off topic. It is extremely relevant.
Yeah. And we have to get away from that because that's the measure of how important, valuable, or useful we are. The money.
Something that also struck me in what you said is that the productivity of older people, that played a huge role at the beginning of the pandemic, when people said, oh, well, this is a disease that only affects older people, that's okay. And then as soon as it started affecting younger people, then it was a very big problem.
Yeah.
It was very clear from that older people are dispensable.
Yeah, disposable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let them die because they don't have anything to contribute. And well, what does a 2-year-old child have to contribute? And yet that life is infinitely valuable. So this gets into, and this gets into the Christian ideal of the dignity of every human life. And that ties back to the LGBT person. Every life has dignity. The LGBT person, the refugee, the migrant, the person who's on a hospital bed, who can't even speak, the infant, right? So human dignity, that's what gives us dignity, not how much money we make. I mean, to say something crazy like, how much money does your 5-year-old son make? Oh, he only makes, what a useless child. So we have to.
I've always wanted my children to get into modeling or acting so that I could get a little side income to pay for their expenses. But I have to tell you that what it makes me think is that I really wanted you to come on board to talk about spirituality, but now I want to do a follow-up discussion in which we talk about capitalism and how companies can also maybe align themselves better with the yearning of human beings for more balanced life.
I'd be happy to. And interestingly, I still consider myself a capitalist. I still think it's the most efficient system for distributing goods and services, but it's not perfect. And part of it is we have to critique it.
Yeah, and at Out Leadership, that's exactly what we do. We say, you could be more inclusive of people that are at the periphery. So I love that. So to kind of conclude, because I know you're very busy and I don't want to take too much of your time, but there's something I loved in your book is that you talk about that lesbian that tells you that it was more difficult for her to come out as a Catholic to her lesbian friend than it was to come out as a lesbian to her Catholic friend. And so can you tell us a little more about that story and what it says about that kind of artificial rift between LGBTQ plus people and spirituality? And maybe what can LGBTQ plus people do to celebrate more the fact that they are also people of faith, that they also are members of the church, that they also are part of the human family that is trying to find meaning and purpose in life, because I think that story, even though it's kind of a joke, it's also very telling about the fact that LGBTQ plus people have decided there's religion here and there's LGBTQ plus people here.
Yeah, so there's a lot of antipathy towards religion in the LGBTQ community, not surprisingly, as there is in the secular world. And her point was that when she talked about being Catholic to her lesbian friends and her LGBTQ friends, they were horrified. And she said she found it more easy to be an LGBTQ person in the church than it was to be a Catholic in the LGBTQ community. It's not surprising. I think she called it, double evangelization, right? So evangelizing in a sense, spreading the word both inside the church about LGBT people and then about the church in the LGBT community. It's not surprising. I think the wonderful thing about this woman is that she was comfortable with both of her identities. And that's part of it. And a lot of it is, there is a certain burden, I would say, on the LGBT person to do that kind of evangelization. But that's what we're called to do. You know, when you were talking about your transgender friends who were saying that their idea of what they're called to do is service, I think that's part of the LGBT person's mission, in a sense, is to do that double evangelization. Yeah, I mean, I live in New York City. I hang out with people who are not always religious, and there is that sort of head scratching, like, well, how can you believe in all that stuff? And it's fine. I mean, it's part of it's just talking about your experience, just as much as in the church they say, well, how can you be LGBT and still be Catholic or Christian? You talk about your experience. This is who I am. So I think experience is where we start.
So to end our discussion, Father Martin, when I was preparing for this interview, I was telling my friend that I was terrified about saying something offensive or asking a question that was, and people said, well, Father Martin doesn't get offended. He's used to facing gigantic.
I'm used to really offensive things, and even that I don't get offended by.
And that you kind of get criticized by both sides, on that specific ministry to LGBTQ plus people. So what is your secret to deal with disapproval, or and also, to be frankly, a bit of an activist on both sides, because in your book, there is a recommendation for what you call the institutional church, but there is also a recommendation for LGBT people to be less antagonistic too.
Yeah. So
you're basically an activist on both sides of this bridge. How do you deal with disapproval and being a bit of in the margin of thinking?
Yeah, well, I would say that the disapproval now is coming much more from the right wing of the church. The LGBT community, I think, for the most part, understands what I'm doing, right? And so, and I also provide more of a space for protest and whatnot in the second edition of the book, because that was the challenge that people said to me. Well, we can't be. How can we be? It's not an equal bridge in a sense. But in terms of still getting critique. A couple of things. First of all, to be free of the need for everyone to love you, like you, or approve of you, to be free of that, and to see, Jesus needed to be free of that. Not everybody liked him. He was a pretty great guy. That's the first thing. So to be free of that need. Second, as a Christian, to recognize that, this was just in the gospel passage a couple of days ago, that the servant is not greater than the master. And so if they persecuted Jesus, why wouldn't we expect that? If we're going to follow along in his footsteps. I'm not comparing myself to him, but it's not surprising, right? And then the third thing is to kind of take this in stride and really not let it bother you, and to also say that a lot of the people who are critiquing me are, they're pretty homophobic, they're pretty mean. There's a word we don't use too much, méchant, I guess, and we have to understand that this is going to be part of our lives. My mantra, another funny thing that the superior general of the Jesuits said to me through a friend, which is pretty funny, but very clever. If you're going to be a bridge, then people from both sides are going to walk all over you. And so to expect that, but really my mantra is, who cares? So if I have some right-wing online homophobic Catholic hate group. I just got an email saying I'm giving a talk at an online talk, and people are going to protest, which is pretty funny. It's going to be online, but they're going to protest outside wherever it is. If it's this group of kind of hateful, homophobic people, who cares? I mean, I wouldn't want them to do it to other people, but it doesn't really bother me anymore. And a lot of these people, we have to understand, as I'm sure you know, and your viewers know, a lot of these people are struggling with their own sexuality, right? And so most of the people I find who are the most vicious, the most virulent, they're either ex-gays, or you can tell that just from listening to them that there's something going on within them. And, I'll tell you, Fabrice, recently I've been getting, I'm not making this up, I've been getting messages from people, usually young men, who will say, Father, forgive me, I was terrible to you online a couple of years ago, and now I'm out. So you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, and I think also in the book you talk about having a bit of compassion for the fact that everybody is suffering, and that even people that are, and that's that when you talk about compassion, respect, and sensitivity, you say, some of those people also have had struggle in their life related to LGBTQ plus issues, and trying to understand that is maybe where you find the compassion, and that leads to the reconciliation.
Yeah, and I try never to attack them. I try never to be uncharitable, but I also don't let it dissuade me, because look, I know I also have the support of, I mean, the Pope, my Jesuit superiors, many cardinals and archbishops. And so for example, let's take an example. So, if I'm not challenging any church teaching, it's talking about love and mercy and compassion. If I'm putting that message forth and I have the support of the Pope and my Jesuit superiors and my Jesuit brothers and cardinals and bishops who I respect, and let's say one bishop from somewhere says something horrible about what I'm doing, why would I let that bother me? I mean, he's welcome to his own opinion. I'm not going to be mean to him, but I'm not going to let it bother me. I mean, if Jesus, had waited till everyone approved of his message, he would have never left Nazareth. He would still be making doors, and tables. He didn't wait for people to approve of him. He got rejected from his hometown. Not to get too biblical, but there's a passage where he's rejected from his hometown after he preaches in the synagogue. They drive him to a hill and they're going to push him off the hill. This is in the Gospels. And he leaves and he goes to the Sea of Galilee. So he didn't even need the approval of the people in his hometown.
Yeah.
So my mantra for this is really, who cares?
Well, Father Martin, thank you so much. It was incredibly inspiring. I love the fact that, we get to discuss concrete steps in which LGBTQ people that want to develop a spiritual life can take to get on their journey. I love that we talked about, progress in the church and the fact that it's not a monolithic institution. But I also love that you made a pitch by not being defined by the amount of money you make and the number of hours you and try to create space for because I think our audience definitely needed to hear that.
Well, thanks. And I also make zero. I take a vow of poverty. So if I'm defined by how much money I make, I have no definition. But I want to say thank you to
all
you.
Those books are not bringing gigantic royalties.
Oh, they are, but they go to the Jesuits. I don't see anything. Those books, those books have made about $2 or $3 million. And sometimes I say that people say, oh, and I say, again, this is this sort of this taboo about saying how much money you make. And I don't get any of it. So it goes to the Jesuits. So I'm happy to help them. But I want to say to you,
don't worry, because in New York, you cannot buy an apartment for $2 million.
That's right. I want to say thank you to you, and merci bien to you. And maybe la prochaine fois, nous pouvons parler en français un peu.
J'adorerais, and I would love to have a subsequent conversation at some point about productivity and also what companies can do to maybe align themselves better with what would make their employees more satisfied with work.
Happy to.
So thank you so much, Father Martin.
You're welcome.
And happy Pride, because I know you are going to spend time with LGBTQ plus parishioners. So I wish you a happy Pride, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. And one more thing, I'll tell you that this the name of the movie, the name of the documentary, which will premiere at Tribeca this month, is also Building a Bridge, and people can see it in person and online, and I think they'd enjoy it. So thanks very much. I
actually was looking for a trailer yesterday and I could not find it, but hopefully it's coming.
No trailers. They wait to until it's purchased by someone like Netflix or CNN to do a trailer. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it.
And what is crazy too is that it's produced by Martin Scorsese.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's great, and I think it's going to give your message to a wider audience.
Thank you.
Which is amazing. Well, I really appreciate your time, Father Martin. I wish you a good day, and I hope we talk to you very soon.
Thanks. À bientôt.
Ciao.